The transfer documents were stamped with 3 seals. Wei Cheng read them in the back of the supply cart as it moved through the final checkpoint, the low stone gate that marked the boundary between the Empire's administered territory and what the Empire's administrators had officially classified as Marginal Development Zone 9, which was bureaucratic language for land that had been surveyed, found worthless, and assigned a designation that made it sound intentional. The documents stated, 1 land parcel, eastern boundary undefined due to terrain irregularity. 1 residential structure, category 4. 1 agricultural outbuilding, condition unassessed. 20 units of assigned labor, female, mixed classification. Duration of assignment, permanent, pending administrative review. 20 units of assigned labor. He had seen this language in land registers many times during his years in the Bureau of Agricultural Survey, the cold inventory notation of people reduced to column entries. He had written it himself, in other registers, for other parcels, without thinking about what it described. The cart stopped. The checkpoint guard waved them through without looking up. Wei Cheng folded the documents and looked at the road ahead. The land arrived like a verdict. He had been preparing himself for bad. The phrase marginal development zone appeared in bureau records primarily in the context of confiscation disputes, failed reclamation projects, and administrative notes that ended with the phrase further investment not recommended. He had processed 17 such parcels in his 8 years as a junior land assessor. He knew what marginal development looked like. He had not adequately prepared for this. The cart came over a low rise and stopped, and he looked at what the Empire had given him, and the word that arrived in his mind was not bad, it was conclusive. As in, whoever had selected this particular parcel for his exile had not been careless. They had been specific. The ground was the color of old ash, not brown, not gray, but the particular bleached white gray of soil that had been salinated past the point of ordinary failure into something that looked geological. Wide cracks ran through it in irregular patterns, some of them deep enough to lose a hand in. At the edges of the cracks, a white crystalline crust had formed, salt, leaching out from whatever water table existed below in the slow process by which alkaline ground expressed its own poisoning. Scattered across this surface, at intervals that suggested contempt rather than distribution, grew low thorn bushes of a variety Wei Cheng did not recognize, their stems the gray-brown of things that survived through stubbornness rather than health. In the middle distance, a structure. Long, low, built from the local gray stone in a style that suggested functional intent in the past and structural compromise in the present. The roof had partially collapsed at one end. The walls stood. This was the residential structure, category 4. To its left, a smaller building, the agricultural outbuilding, had not maintained even this standard. One wall was down. The remaining 3 leaned in a way that indicated ongoing negotiation with gravity. Behind both structures, a hole in the ground. Circular, perhaps 2 meters across, partially filled with debris. The former well. The possibly former well, the documents had used the word semi-blocked, which in bureau language meant we cannot confirm it ever produced water and we are not going to try. A hot wind moved across the flat surface of the land, carrying with it a fine white dust that tasted, when it reached his lips, faintly of mineral and salt. This was the Empire's answer to 8 years of service, one accurate report submitted at the wrong time about land irregularities in a prefect's revenue district, and one refusal to revise the numbers. He got down from the cart. The 20 women were already there. They had arrived separately, a different cart, earlier, because the supply requisition had been processed through a different administrative channel and the timing had not been coordinated, which told Wei Cheng something about how much coordination anyone had considered necessary for this particular transfer. They were standing, some of them, and sitting, the rest, near the collapsed outbuilding, in the shade it provided, which at this hour was minimal. He looked at them and they looked at him with the specific quality of people who had been looked at by new owners many times and had developed an assessment capacity that was faster and more accurate than the owners usually realized. He did not make a speech. He had nothing to say that would improve the situation and several things he could say that would make it worse. He walked to the former well. The debris was a mix of fallen stone from the rim, wind-blown material, and what appeared to be the deliberate filling of someone who had decided that an open hole was a hazard. He crouched at the edge and looked down. Dark, approximately 4 meters, and at the bottom, he waited for his eyes to adjust, the suggestion of something that was not dry. Not water, not wetness, but the specific quality of darkness that indicated the absence of the bone-dry condition that would have confirmed total failure. He stood up. Then the system appeared. Not loudly, a panel in his vision, dry and immediate, like a document he had not requested but recognized the format of. Estate renewal system initializing host parcel registered, marginal zone 9, eastern sector current status, critical soil viability, 4 out of 100 water access, unconfirmed shelter integrity, 21/100ths labor capacity, 20 units, functional assessment pending estimated survival window at current resource level, 19 days core principle. The system rewards completed cycles, not effort. Find water. Build shelter. Close the first loop. Everything else follows from the first loop or nothing follows. It faded to a small indicator at the edge of his vision, a thin line that pulsed amber. 19 days. He had processed enough land assessments to understand what that number meant in resource terms. 20 people, minimal food supply from the transit provisions, no water source confirmed, no shelter adequate for the wind that was going to worsen at night. 19 days was not a deadline. It was the system's estimate of how long before the situation became irreversible through attrition. He looked at the former well again. Then at the women near the outbuilding. Then at the vast flat expanse of salinated nothing that extended in 3 directions to low horizons. He had assessed marginal land for 8 years. He had written the reports. He had used the language. He had never stood on it. Overseer Pang arrived before Wei Cheng had finished his first circuit of the parcel. He came on a horse that was better fed than anything else in the landscape, accompanied by one guard who rode slightly behind and slightly to the right with the practiced positioning of someone who had been told to look capable without being required to demonstrate it. Pang himself was broad, not tall, but wide in the way of a man whose authority had insulated him from the physical consequences of his appetites for long enough that the insulation had become structural. He looked at Wei Cheng with the comprehensive contempt of a man who had seen many like him arrive and had never seen one arrive correctly. "Bureau man," he said, without dismounting. "They told me you were coming." Wei Cheng said nothing. Zone 9. Pang looked at the parcel with the expression of a man confirming something he already knew. "You know what the last 3 got for Zone 9? I'll tell you. One lasted 6 months before he was found face down in his own field, such as it was. One lasted a year and then walked east and didn't come back. One's still here." He tilted his head toward the west, where, Wei Cheng had been told, another exiled holding existed. "You'll meet Old One eventually. He'll tell you things that sound like advice and are mostly warning. Don't borrow anything from him, he has nothing to lend and charges interest anyway." He paused. "Oversight for Zone 9 runs through my station," he said. "Monthly. I come to confirm viability, that the holding is operational, the labor is present, no resources have been abandoned or concealed. Standard inspection. For that service, there's a contribution. Grain, if you have it. Labor hours if you don't. Flexible." He smiled in the way of a man for whom flexibility meant other people's options narrowing. "Welcome to the Deadlands, Bureau man. You have about a month before the hot wind season starts. I'd use it." He turned the horse and rode back the way he had come, unhurried, the guard following. Wei Cheng watched him go. Then he turned to the 20 women who had been watching from the shade of the outbuilding, and who were now watching him with the collective attention of people who had just seen a dominant animal establish territory and were waiting to understand where that left them. He looked at the collapsed outbuilding wall. The former well. The salinated ground. The amber line at the edge of his vision. He said, "Which of you knows anything about water?" Silence. The wind moved across the flat white land and tasted of mineral and salt. He had 19 days to make the first loop work. He started counting. No one answered his question about water. This was not surprising. Wei Cheng had processed enough labor transfer documents to understand the logic of people who had been owned long enough to have developed a comprehensive policy about what they revealed to new holders. Information was the last private resource. A woman who knew something useful and said so immediately had learned, through experience, that usefulness attracted attention and attention attracted cost. He looked at them for a moment. 20 faces, various ages, youngest perhaps 15, oldest perhaps 50, in the specific condition of people who had been fed at subsistence level for long enough that the body had made its accommodations. Thin, but not the acute thinness of recent starvation. The chronic thinness of reduced expectation, where the body had adjusted its baseline downward and was maintaining that lower baseline adequately. He did not ask again about water. Instead he said, "I need to know what everyone can do. Not what you've been told to do. What you can actually do. If you can carry, I need to know. If you can dig, I need to know. If you know anything about soil, plants, water, animals, fire, construction, medicine, storage, I need to know." Silence. "I understand why you're not answering," he said. "I'm not going to explain myself. But I will tell you one true thing. The system that activated when I arrived here gives me 19 days before this holding fails completely. 19 days means all of us. I'm not your previous situation. I don't know what your previous situation was. I know what this one is, and it requires that I know what is actually here." He waited. A woman near the back of the group, broad-shouldered, with the specific stillness of someone who had decided to be physical furniture until she understood the situation, looked at him with the flat assessment of someone running a rapid calculation. She said, "I can carry anything you have." This was Hongda. He divided the first day into 3 problems and assigned people to each by the blunt method of pointing. Problem 1, the former well. 5 people, tools from the transit cart, 2 shovels, 1 pick, 1 rope, 1 bucket. Task, clear the debris and determine whether there was water at the bottom. Problem 2, the residential structure. 6 people, salvage from the collapsed outbuilding, usable stone, usable timber, anything structural. Task, close the collapsed end of the residential structure enough to block the night wind. Not comfortable. Windproof. Problem 3, organic collection. The remaining 9, including himself. Task, walk the parcel in expanding circles and bring back everything that was not rock and not living. Dead thornbush stems. Animal droppings, the wind had blown some across from wherever animals occasionally passed. The dried remains of whatever had previously been grown in the area, compacted now into a crust but potentially separable. Anything biological. Hongda went to the well group without being assigned. She looked at the 5 he had designated, looked at the hole, and picked up the heaviest tool, the pick, and went down on the rope without discussion. He let her. The pick work at the bottom of the well was the job that required the most physical output, and she had established, through the one sentence she had spoken, that she was willing to provide it. He watched her descend. The system updated, labor node identified, high physical output Hongda, current classification, general labor potential specialization path, site security/heavy construction current contribution rate, 340% above cohort average. He noted this and returned to the organic collection circuit. Shen Lu was in his collection group. He noticed her because of the way she moved across the cracked ground, not looking at the surface for organic material as the others were, but looking at the cracks themselves. At the depth of them, the color of the exposed earth inside them, the pattern of the white mineral crust at their edges. He watched her for 10 minutes without speaking. She was not aware he was watching, or had decided to behave as if she was not. She walked slowly, diverging from the collection pattern he had described, and crouched at 3 different crack formations, and at each one she did something that looked like nothing, pressed her fingers against the inner wall of the crack, held them there for several seconds, removed them and looked at them. He walked over to her. She straightened immediately with the reflex of someone caught at something private. He looked at her fingers. They were damp. "How deep?" he said. She looked at him. The calculation he had seen in Hongda's eyes ran faster in hers, a sharper intelligence, more accustomed to operating quickly. "At the eastern edge," she said finally. "Where the ground slopes down by maybe a hand's width, you can't see it unless you're looking. The cracks there run deeper. The moisture at the bottom of them is higher than here." She paused. "There's something below the salt layer. Not clean water. But something. How long have you known this?" Another pause. "Since we arrived. This morning." He looked at the eastern edge of the parcel. The microslope she described was invisible at normal observation distance. The ground looked flat from any standing position. She had found it by walking it and reading the cracks. The system updated without announcing itself. Labor node identified, HYDRO sensitivity Shenlu, current classification, general labor first upgrade applied, moisture detection passive effective range, 15 meters. Accuracy, soil moisture gradient mapping. Groundwater proximity sensing, active note, this upgrade was not given. It was revealed. The capacity existed. The system has clarified it. Wei Cheng read this and understood the distinction. The system had not made Shenlu able to find water. She had already been able to find water. The system had registered that this capacity existed and had sharpened it, made it more precise, extended its range, converted an instinct into a functional tool. He told her to mark every location on the eastern edge where she felt the moisture was highest. He gave her 3 sticks from the collection pile and told her to push them into the ground at the 3 best points. She went without further instruction. The well team hid water at mid-afternoon. Not good water, the report Hong did delivered when she climbed out was precise and unencouraging, dark, with a mineral smell, visible particulate. But wet. Genuinely, continuously wet, not residual moisture from old use but active seepage from below. Wei Cheng separated the water question into 2 streams immediately. Drinking water, the well output, processed. He had nothing to filter with except what was available. He had the transit provisions, which included a small amount of salt useless here in grain, and he had the land itself. He had sand, below the salt crust, if he dug for it. Sand filtration was basic enough that he had encountered it in agricultural survey records from arid zone reclamation projects. Layer sand in a container, run water through, collect at the base. Not clean. Cleaner. Technical water, for compacting, for the organic material, for construction, the well output used directly, without filtration. The soil needed moisture to work with. The organic material needed moisture to begin decomposition. The structure's mortar, if he could make any, needed water. He divided the bucket output between these 2 uses and established a rationing system before the sun moved further. Then he went to find Mao Jing. He had noticed her during the organic collection because she was the one who knew what she was collecting without being told. While the others picked up dead material indiscriminately, stems, crust, anything biological, Mao Jing was sorting. Not obviously, not with any announcement, but her collection pile, when he looked at it against the others, had a different composition, more animal dropping, less dry stem, more of the dark crusted material from the soil surface that had the specific quality of decomposed biological matter rather than mineral crust. She was selecting for nitrogen content without calling it that. He crouched beside her pile. "You've done compost work," he said. She did not look up. "I did waste processing. For a large household. 8 years. Her voice had the flatness of someone describing a sentence they had served. "This is the same principle." "This is not the same anything," she said. "That was a managed system with correct materials and tools and water in space. This is a salt flat. The principle is the same," he said. "Organic material, moisture, time, heat. We have organic material. We now have water. We have time if we don't waste the first 19 days. And the sun here generates more heat than any household compost system you worked in." She was quiet. "I need a pit," he said. 3 meters by 2 meters, 1 meter deep. On the eastern side of the residential structure, in the wind shadow. I need it lined with the clay soil layer beneath the salt crust, which will hold moisture. I need the first input layer tonight so the biological process starts before we sleep." Mao Jing looked at the ground. At the salt crust surface. At the approximate location he had indicated. "The clay layer is about 30 centimeters down," she said. "Deeper where the salt crust is thickest." She had assessed the soil structure during the collection circuit. She knew where the clay was. "Then we dig to it," Wei Cheng said. She picked up her shovel and went to the location without further negotiation. The absence of enthusiasm was complete. The presence of competence was also complete. By the end of the first day the holding had 1 functional well, producing low-quality water at a rate of approximately 40 liters per hour. 1 basic sand filtration column made from a cracked ceramic transit container, a cloth bag, and the cleanest sand from 60 centimeters below the surface. One compost pit, begun 30 centimeters deep, first organic layer in, first water added. The residential structure's collapsed end had been partially closed, not sealed, but blocked against the direct wind with a drystone fill that would hold through the night. 3 marker sticks on the eastern perimeter where Shenlu's assessment indicated the strongest subsurface moisture. The system updated: Day 1 cycle closed water, active, low quality, filtration in progress shelter, partial wind protection improved organic cycle, initiated survival window, 19 days 24 days 5 additional days. The first loop is not closed. It is opened. Close it: water organic soil growth nutrition water current gap, soil and growth. Address next. Wei Cheng distributed the evening ration from the transit provisions, reduced from what he estimated the standard distribution had been on the transit cart, but not dramatically reduced. He needed them functional, not grateful. The difference mattered. Gratitude was a psychological condition. Functional was a physical one. He was managing a physical system, and the physical system required that each component maintain its operating capacity. Hongdi ate her portion without looking at anyone and positioned herself near the well without being told. She had decided, apparently, that the well was the most valuable thing on the parcel and that its protection was her function. She had not asked. She had simply done it. Shenlu ate quickly and went to the eastern perimeter in the last light, crouching at the marker sticks with her fingers in the ground. Mao Jing ate and then sat staring at the compost pit with the expression of someone doing calculations they found professionally unsatisfying. The rest, the other 17, ate and moved toward the residential structure in the collective movement of people whose primary remaining objective was to stop being outside. Wei Cheng sat outside. The system's amber line pulsed at the edge of his vision. 24 days now, up from 19. 5 days bought by 1 afternoon of directed work. He looked at the eastern perimeter where Shenlu was still crouched in the fading light, reading something in the ground that no one else could read. The first loop was open. Not closed, open. Water existed. Organic process was begun. Soil work and growth were the gaps. Tomorrow he would start the microplot. Not a field. Not a plan for a field. One small pocket of amended earth, hidden in the wind shadow of the residential structure's north wall, where Shenlu's moisture reading was highest and Mao Jing's composting would produce its first usable output. Small enough to be invisible from distance. Large enough to be real. The Empire had sent him here to disappear. The first loop disagreed. The microplot site was chosen by 3 criteria. First, the north wall of the residential structure blocked the prevailing wind from the west, which meant the air in the shadow zone moved less and retained heat longer in the evening hours, critical for germination in a cold night environment. Second, Shenlu's moisture reading at the closest marker stick to the structure's foundation showed the highest subsurface reading on the entire parcel. The building's stone foundation, Wei Cheng theorized, was conducting groundwater laterally from the deeper strata, the same principle by which old walls in arid regions often had moister soil at their base than the surrounding ground. The salt crust here was thinner. The clay layer was shallower. Third, it was not visible from the access track. Overseer Pang had arrived from the west. Anyone approaching from the west, the south, or the track's northern fork would see the front face of the residential structure, the damaged end, the former well, the flat expanse of salt ground. The north wall shadow zone was behind the building, visible only from the eastern perimeter, which had no track and no reason for casual approach. These 3 criteria together made it the only viable location on the parcel for the first planting. Wei Cheng marked the plot boundaries on the morning of day 2, 4 meters along the wall, 1.5 meters out from it. 6 square meters. He would not use all of it immediately. He would use 2 square meters and leave the rest as prepared but unplanted ground that could expand when the first production cycle was established. Then he explained to Mao Jing, specifically and without softening, what he needed from the soil preparation. The salt crust came off in plates. Beneath it, at approximately 25 centimeters in the plot zone, the clay layer was present, gray-brown, still holding some cohesion despite the arid conditions. Wei Cheng had Mao Jing and 2 others break up the clay with the pick, exposing it to air and breaking its compaction. Then the first compost output. It was early, the pit had been running for 1 day and the material was not decomposed but had begun warming from microbial activity, was mixed into the broken clay at a ratio Wei Cheng had estimated from memory of arid soil reclamation reports: heavy organic amendment, light mineral content, maximum moisture retention. He had no agricultural inputs. What he had was the compost pit output, partially decomposed organic material providing nitrogen and microbial activity. The sand from filtration column cleaning, silica content to improve drainage in the clay-heavy mix and prevent waterlogging. Ash from the first cooking fire, potassium and phosphorus in small quantities, pH adjustment that would partially counteract the soil's alkalinity. Water from the well, filtered through the sand column, mineral content present but reduced, oxygenated by the pouring process. He mixed these in sequence. The result was a growing medium that would not have impressed any agricultural specialist. It was better by a significant margin than the salinated crust surrounding it. The microchannels came next. He had Shenlu mark the moisture gradient across the plot surface. Her passive sensing gave him a map of where subsurface moisture was highest. He ran the irrigation channels toward those points, not away from them. The channel water would meet the rising groundwater and the plant's roots would have access to both sources simultaneously. This doubled the effective water availability without doubling the water input. Each channel was 4 centimeters wide, 3 centimeters deep, running at a slight angle to prevent pooling. The angle was the critical detail: too flat and the water sat and evaporated, too steep and it ran through without absorbing. He used a piece of straight stone as a level reference and adjusted by eye, checking the flow with a small test pour from the bucket. 6 channels, branching from one primary inlet at the uphill end of the plot, uphill by the 3 centimeters of microslope that Shenlu had detected on day 1. Total water input required per day, approximately 12 liters for the planted section. The well produced 40 liters per hour. The filtration column processed 8 liters per hour. The 12-liter daily requirement for the plot was manageable without compromising drinking water allocation. The seeds were the problem he had been deferring. The transit provisions had included grain, broken millet, which was food, not seed stock, but which retained germination capacity at some percentage of intact grain. He had been rationing the millet for eating. He now diverted a small portion, 100 grams, which represented approximately 3 days of reduced ration for one person, to planting. He also planted the vegetable scraps from the first 2 days of cooking, the root ends of the dried vegetables from the transit provisions, which retained the cellular structure for regrowth if planted correctly. Onion bases. The stem nodes of the dried gourd strips. These were not seeds, they were vegetative propagation material, which had the advantage of faster establishment than seed germination and the disadvantage of producing plants identical to the originals, which in this case were already stressed plants from low-quality provisions. He planted the millet in rows of 5 at the channel intersections, where moisture would be highest. The vegetative material went along the wall base, where the foundation moisture was strongest and the wind shadow deepest. Then he covered it. Not with soil, with the salt crust plates he had removed from the plot surface, arranged flat over the planted sections with gaps of 2 centimeters for air circulation. From above, from distance, the plot looked like the same salt plate surface as the surrounding ground. The plants, when they emerged, would push through the gaps. Until then they were invisible. This was the camouflage layer. It also functioned as a thermal mass. The gray-white plates absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly through the night, moderating the temperature at soil level. The labor system he implemented on day 3 was not popular. He divided the 20 women into 5 functional groups of 4, with assigned tasks that rotated on a 3-day cycle except for the specialists Shenlu, Mao Jing, Hongda, who stayed with their primary functions permanently because the system's upgrade logic appeared to work through sustained specialization rather than rotation. The ration system was direct: full ration for full work output, 3/4 ration for partial output, half ration for non-contribution. He announced this without apology and watched the response move through the group. Most accepted it. Acceptance was not enthusiasm, it was the practical calculation of people who understood that the half-ration outcome was worse than the full ration requirement. 2 did not. The first was a woman of perhaps 35 who had been, at some previous point, a household servant in a position with status. He could tell this from the way she positioned herself relative to others and from her hands, which had not done heavy labor until recently. She performed the assigned tasks slowly, with the specific deliberateness of someone calibrating their output to the minimum required for the full ration while preserving maximum personal energy. This was not sabotage. It was rational optimization from her perspective. Wei Cheng noted it and said nothing. She was contributing enough. The efficiency loss was real and was not yet critical. The second was more direct. On day 4, Mao Jing reported that the compost pit's organic material level had dropped overnight. Not dramatically, but she had been tracking the volume precisely, because volume tracking was the reflex of someone who had managed household waste systems, and the drop was inconsistent with the expected settling rate. Someone had removed material from the pit. Wei Cheng looked at the pit. Then at the group. Then he asked, without raising his voice, "The compost material is not food. It's not burnable efficiently. It's not useful for anything except what it's being used for. Taking it from the pit sets the organic cycle back by the amount taken. Does anyone want to tell me why they took it?" Silence. "The ration system is not changing," he said. "But if I find the pit has been drawn down again, the person responsible loses access to the well's filtered water output for 2 days and takes technical water only. This is not punishment. It's resource allocation based on contribution to the system." He looked at the group. A girl, perhaps 17, small, with the specific expression of someone who had been caught and was processing whether to escalate or absorb, looked at the ground. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Whatever you were trying to do with it, show me. I might be able to do it better and give you credit for the idea." She said nothing that day. On day 5 she came to him and showed him that she had been collecting the warmest part of the compost, the active core, and pressing it around the base of one of the thorn bushes at the parcel's edge, apparently testing whether the heat and microbial content would revive it. The thorn bush was showing, faintly, the green of new growth at 2 nodes. Wei Cheng looked at this for a long moment. "You found a nitrogen response on alkaline-tolerant native vegetation," he said. She did not know what this meant. She looked at him. "The thorn bush can grow here," he said. "It already knows how. If it responds to organic amendment, we can use it as a windbreak along the eastern perimeter. A living windbreak, established from existing native plants, that doesn't require us to keep anything alive from seeds, because these plants are already alive." He paused. "How many of these bushes are on the parcel?" She counted. 43, distributed across the full parcel area. He put her in charge of the native plant amendment program the same afternoon. 1 person, 1 function, pulled from the general rotation. She became the 5th specialist. On day 8, Xiaomei spoke for the first time. She had been present in the labor groups, completing assigned tasks with the efficiency of someone who was physically weaker than most but compensated through attention to detail. Her channel maintenance work was the most precise of anyone assigned to irrigation. She had said nothing since arrival. On the morning of day 8 she came to Wei Cheng at the north wall plot and stood beside him and looked at the salt plate camouflage surface. Then she said, "The plates are absorbing too much moisture from the gaps. On cold nights the condensation on the underside of the plates is running down and pooling at the channel edges. It's not reaching the root zone, it's pooling and then evaporating at the surface." He looked at her. "If you angle the plates slightly, 2 degrees, toward the channel inlets, the condensation runs toward the channels instead of pooling. You'd recover maybe 30% of the night condensation as usable root zone moisture." He crouched and looked at the plate arrangement. She was correct. The pooling was visible as a faint dark line at the channel edges in the morning. He had attributed it to capillary action from the subsurface. It was condensation runoff. "Show me the angle," he said. She showed him. The adjustment took 2 hours for the full planted section. He watched her work and understood that the silence of the first 8 days had been the silence of someone watching and processing, not of someone absent. The system updated that evening. Labor node identified, microenvironment sensing Xiaomei, current classification, general labor upgrade applied, condensation and thermal gradient mapping effective contribution, plot water efficiency plus 28% from modification specialization path, soil and moisture architecture. On day 9, Laowen came from the west. He arrived on foot, which explained his condition. The walk from his parcel to Zone 9's eastern sector took most of a morning in the deadland heat. He was perhaps 60, with the specific quality of a man who had been reducing himself for years, paring away everything that wasn't essential to the next day's survival until what remained was a very efficient and very diminished version of a person. He stood at the parcel's western approach and looked at Wei Cheng with eyes that had seen many arrivals and had become very good at reading how long they would last. He looked at the group, the women distributed across the parcel in functional positions, the eastern perimeter work, the well operation. He looked at the residential structure. Then he looked at the north wall zone. From the western approach, there was nothing to see. The salt plate camouflage was working. The planted section was invisible. But he stood there for a long time, looking at the north wall's shadow, and his expression had the quality of a man noticing an absence rather than a presence, noticing that the zone behind the building looked used, in some way he couldn't identify from this distance. "Bureau man," he said finally. "You haven't lost anyone yet." "No," Wei Cheng said. 9 days. Lao Wen looked at the well, the bucket system, the filtration column, the 2 women managing the output rotation. "You fixed the well." "Partially. The last man who had this parcel couldn't fix it. He had 16 people and 3 months of provisions." He looked at the well again, and at the organized labor around it, with the expression of someone whose model of how Zone 9 operated was encountering data that didn't fit. "What do you want?" Wei Cheng said. Lao Wen looked at him. "To see how long you last," he said. "That's all anyone does here. We watch each other and count the days." He turned and walked back west. Wei Cheng watched him go and thought about what the old man had seen and what he would report to Overseer Pang, who paid in small ways for small observations, and whose monthly inspection was now 10 days away. The north wall plot had its first germination signals, 2 millet shoots, barely visible, pushing through the plate gaps. 10 days to make them invisible or make them irrelevant. He went back to the irrigation channels. Overseer Pang arrived on day 19. Not the monthly inspection he had described at the first meeting 10 days early, which told Wei Cheng 2 things. First, Lao Wen had reported something. Second, whatever Lao Wen had reported had been interesting enough to motivate a man who did as little unnecessary movement as possible to move unnecessarily. He came again on the better-fed horse, again with the single guard, but this time he dismounted. Standing inspections were casual. Dismounted inspections were deliberate. He walked the western face of the parcel first, the approach side, the visible side. The salt ground. The former outbuilding, still 3-walled. The well, which he stopped at and looked into with the focused attention of a man who had seen the previous holder's failure to use it. The bucket was there. The filtration column was there. He looked at it with the expression of someone who recognized the function without having expected to see it. "You fixed the well," he said. "Partially operational," Wei Cheng said. "Low yield. Marginal quality." Pang looked at the filtration column. "Where did you get the sand layer?" 60 centimeters below the surface. Below the salt crust, the substrate is clean enough for filtration purposes. Pang absorbed this. He looked at the 20 women distributed across the parcel in the work positions that Wei Cheng had assigned that morning, which were the real positions, not a performance. There was no point in performing a different operation for the inspection. The actual operation was the one that needed to continue, and pausing it for appearance would cost a day's output. He watched Hongda moving stone from the outbuilding site to the eastern perimeter. She was building a wind deflection wall along the edge, low, not high enough to be visible from distance, designed to redirect the salt wind over the native thornbush amendment zone rather than through it. He watched Shenlu at the eastern perimeter, crouched at the ground with her usual focus. He watched Mao Jing at the compost pit area, managing the input rotation. He watched all of this with the expression of a man who had arrived expecting to count survivors and was instead counting an operation. "How many have you lost?" he said. "None," Wei Cheng said. Pang looked at him. 19 days. None. A pause. Pang walked south along the western face, looking at the parcel. He stopped at the residential structure's southern corner and looked along the building's length toward the north wall. The north wall shadow zone was not visible from the southern corner. The building's length blocked the sightline. He would need to walk around the building's end to see it directly. He did not walk around the building's end. Instead, he looked at the building itself, the closed section at the damaged end, the dry stone fill that Wei Cheng's group had completed on day 1. "You closed the wall," he said. Wind protection for the sleeping area. With what? Stone from the outbuilding collapse. Dry set, no mortar. Pang ran his hand along the fill. It was competent work, not beautiful, but tight enough to block wind and stable enough not to shift. He looked at it for a moment with the specific expression of a man recalibrating his assessment of who he was dealing with. The contribution for this month, he said. Given your establishment phase, I'll accept labor hours rather than grain. 2 full days of labor from your best worker. My station has a drainage ditch that needs clearing. Wei Cheng looked at him. 2 days of Hongda's labor, which was the obvious target, the most visible worker, would cost the eastern perimeter wall its primary builder during the most critical phase of construction. 1 day, Wei Cheng said. 1 worker, 1 day. I'm in establishment phase, as you said. 2 days of primary labor sets back work that affects your future grain contribution. You collect more from an operational holding than from a failed one. Pang looked at him with the flat assessment of a man deciding whether the logic was worth the concession. 1 day, he said. This month. Next month, grain. He mounted and rode west without looking back. Wei Cheng watched him go and noted that Pang had not walked around the northern end of the building. He also noted that Pang had arrived 10 days early, had looked very carefully at everything visible, and had left dissatisfied in a way he couldn't articulate. That was more dangerous than a man who had found something. Inside the group, the tension had been building since day 12. It surfaced on the evening of day 17 in the form of a conversation between Hongda and 3 of the general rotation women that Wei Cheng was not present for, but that Xiaomei reported to him the following morning in her precise, observational way. The substance, Hongda's ration, was the same as everyone else's. Hongda's work output was, by any measurable standard, 3 to 4 times the average. Hongda had not been upgraded by the system, her physical contribution had been registered, her potential specialization noted, but no formal upgrade had activated. The 3 general rotation women had been drawing the same full ration for doing a fraction of Hongda's work. This was, from Hongda's perspective, a legitimate grievance. Wei Cheng had the advantage of seeing the system's assessment of Hongda's specialization path, site security and heavy construction, which were functions that would become critical when the holding reached a scale that attracted physical threat. But he could not explain the system's logic to Hongda without explaining the system, which he had not done with anyone. He went to Hongda directly. She was at the eastern perimeter wall, fitting stone in the specific methodical way she had developed herself, no instruction from Wei Cheng, no technique he had taught her. She had figured out the coursing pattern independently. He looked at the wall. It was good. Better than good, it was efficient, built to deflect rather than to block, with a slight curve at the southern end that would redirect wind energy along the perimeter rather than building pressure against the face. You designed this curve, he said. She looked at him. It's more stable. It's also more effective aerodynamically than a straight wall. Did you know that when you built it? A pause. I felt it. The air moves different when you curve it. He looked at her. The system had classified her as physical labor with a security specialization path. What he was looking at was someone whose spatial intelligence was expressing itself through construction rather than through fighting. The upgrade you haven't received yet, he said, isn't about strength. It's about this. He indicated the wall. When the time comes, it'll be for the building and fortification work, not the carrying. The carrying is how you got here. The wall is what you're actually for. She looked at him for a long time with the flat assessment that was her default expression. And the ration, she said, is the same for everyone. That doesn't change. What changes is what you're building toward. He looked at the wall. If this holding survives long enough to need defending, the person who built the walls decides how they're defended. That's not a ration. That's a position. She returned to the wall without responding. But she returned to it, which was the answer that mattered. The system presented its choice on day 20. Milestone, first functional cycle approaching completion, water active. Organic cycle running. Microplot germinating. Shelter stabilized. First loop closing. Choose one development path of water mastery, Shinlu upgrade stage 2. Groundwater mapping expanded to full parcel. Subsurface channel identification. Potential, secondary water source location. The soil renewal, Maojing upgrade stage 2. Accelerated composting. Salt neutralization technique. Alkaline soil conversion rate x3. Potential, expand plot to 20 square meters within 15 days. Seat concealed storage, Shui Yan upgrade stage 1. Identify optimal hidden cache locations. Spoilage reduction. Distributed reserve architecture. Potential, 30-day reserve capacity. Wei Cheng read it twice. Water mastery would find him a second water source critical, because the well's single-point dependency was his greatest structural vulnerability. If Peng decided to interfere with the well, the holding had nothing. Soil renewal would let him expand the microplot dramatically, more food, faster, but at the cost of increased visibility. 20 square meters of amended soil behind the north wall was significantly harder to camouflage than 2 square meters. Concealed storage was defensive, it protected what he had rather than growing it. But the system had been consistent, every growth created a new vulnerability. Having something worth stealing and nowhere to hide it was the next failure mode after having nothing at all. He chose concealed storage. Partially because of Peng's early arrival. Partially because of what Lao Wen's expression had communicated, the look of a man who was watching and would continue watching. Partially because the grain from the transit provisions was running to its end and the microplot's first yield was still 2 weeks away, and the gap between those 2 points needed a buffer. Shui Yan was a woman he had noticed precisely because he had barely noticed her. She was perhaps 40, quiet in the way of someone who had made quietness a professional skill, and her assigned work in the general rotation was always completed, always exactly completed, no more, no less, and she always knew where everything on the parcel was without appearing to track it. When he told her about the storage path, she looked at him with the first direct engagement he had seen from her. 3 locations, she said immediately. Not one. Distributed. And nothing stored where it's transported from. The carrying route shouldn't connect storage point to source. She had been thinking about this before he asked. The salt wind came on day 22. Not the ordinary wind that moved across the parcel daily, a different order of event. It arrived in the early morning as a low yellow-brown line on the western horizon that Shen Lu saw first and reported to Wei Cheng with the urgency of someone who had seen this before. They had 4 hours. Wei Cheng made the decisions in sequence without pausing between them. The microplot, the salt plate camouflage layer, was already in place. He had Hongde and 2 others add a second layer of plates over the most exposed sections, overlapping the first. The millet shoots, 6 of them now, 3 to 4 centimeters tall, were below the plate level. The plates would take the salt deposition. The compost pit, covered with salvaged timber from the outbuilding collapse, weighted with stone. Salt contamination of the pit's active organic layer would set the decomposition process back significantly. The well, the filtration column inside the structure. The bucket system covered. The thornbush amendment zone on the eastern perimeter, nothing he could do. It would take the salt wind directly. He had the girl who had discovered the amendment, her name was Wei Lan, no relation, a coincidence he had not commented on, check the most advanced specimens and mark the ones worth prioritizing for recovery afterward. They moved through the 4 hours of preparation with the specific efficiency of a group that had been operating as a functional system for 3 weeks and had developed the reflexes that came from that. When the wind hit, they were inside. The salt wind ran for 6 hours. When it ended, the parcel's surface was coated in a new white layer of salt deposited from the air, the flat expanse of Zone 9 expressing its character at seasonal scale. Wei Cheng walked the perimeter first. The north wall microplot, the outer plates were salt-coated, some cracked, but the inner layer held. He lifted one plate. Below, a millet shoot, pale, slightly stressed, alive. The eastern perimeter thornbush zone, losses. Approximately a third of the amendment sites showed no recovery response. 2/3 showed resilience, bent, salt-dusted, but standing. The compost pit, the timber cover had held. The active layer was intact. The well, clean. He stood in the post-wind silence and looked at the parcel. Then he looked west, where Lao Wen's parcel was. The old man had no wind preparation, no covered pit, no protected plot. And he saw, at the western boundary, Lao Wen standing and looking east at Wei Cheng's parcel. At the building. At the group emerging in organized sequence to begin damage assessment. At the fact that after a salt wind that had scoured the zone, this parcel's people were moving with purpose rather than sitting with the stunned stillness of a group that had just been reduced further. Lao Wen stood there for a long time. Then he walked back west. He would be at Pang's station by evening. Wei Cheng had no doubt about that. He also had a concealed storage system, a protected microplot with 6 living millet shoots, and a group of 20 women who had just survived a salt wind event without losing a single critical system component. He went back to the assessment circuit. The next phase was coming. He intended to be ready for it. The first millet harvest was not a harvest. It was 12 stalks pulled on day 31, each producing a small head of grain, broken millet, grown from broken millet, so the yield per stalk was lower than intact seed stock would have produced, but the germination rate had been higher because broken grain in amended soil in a moisture-channeled microenvironment had access conditions that intact grain in open field did not. Wei Cheng had bok rai. He was still thinking in the Harchebni framework sometimes. He corrected himself, had Chui Yen count the yield precisely. Total first harvest, approximately 180 grams of grain. Against 20 people's daily consumption requirement, 180 grams was 4 minutes of food. Against the transit provision reserve, now at its final week, it was a signal rather than a supplement, proof that the soil produced, that the loop closed, that the system worked. He replanted immediately. All of it. The second planting went into the expanded plot, not the 2 square meters of the first planting, but the full 6 square meters of the prepared zone, plus a new section he had been amending for 2 weeks along the eastern wall of the residential structure, which gave a second wind shadow and a second microclimate. 8 square meters total, second planting. He kept 12 grams of the harvest in Chui Yan's first distributed cache. Not for eating, as seed reserve, protected against any single point loss event. The system registered the cycle closure, first production loop, closed cycle, water organic soil germination yield replanting loop integrity, 94% survival window, extended to 67 days district hunger index equivalent, not applicable isolated holding upgrade triggered, MAOJing stage 2 salt neutralization technique, active composting rate, x 2.4 soil conversion, alkaline tolerance mapping added new capacity, identify which soil zones can be converted in under 30 days. Wei Cheng read the Mao Jing upgrade and went to find her immediately. She was at the compost pit when he arrived, running the input rotation with the focused dissatisfaction of someone whose professional standards the available materials perpetually failed to meet. He told her what the system had registered. Not the system's language, his translation of it. Her instincts about which soil zones were convertible were now more reliable than before, and he needed her to walk the full parcel and mark every section where she believed conversion was possible within 30 days. She looked at him. All of it, she said. All of it. She took the marking sticks and walked the parcel for 3 hours. When she came back, 41 of the 56 sticks he had given her were placed. The goat arrived on day 34. Not purchased, not gifted, found. Wei Lan, who had been managing the native thornbush amendment zone along the eastern perimeter, came to Wei Cheng in the mid-morning with the expression of someone who had found a problem and wasn't sure which category it belonged in. The goat was old, past its productive years by the look of its coat and teeth, which Wei Cheng assessed with the approximate competence of a man who had read enough agricultural survey reports to know what to look for without ever having looked at an actual goat at close range. Female. Not producing milk. But present, apparently having wandered from somewhere west, possibly Lao Wen's parcel, possibly further, and having found the thornbush amendment zone, which was now the most nutritionally active vegetation in the immediate area. The goat was eating his windbreak. He looked at it for a long moment. The calculus: remove the goat, lose nothing immediately but gain nothing. Keep the goat, lose some thornbush progress but gain the goat's manure output, which was, per animal per day, equivalent to approximately 3 days of the compost pit's organic collection effort, and potentially, if the goat was being strategic rather than simply hungry, gain information about what grew in this zone and was edible. Also, a living animal on the parcel changed the parcel's visible character in a specific way. A holding with livestock was categorically different from a holding without it, in the Empire's administrative framework and in Pang's perceptual framework. Livestock implied permanence, resource sufficiency, agricultural intent. He kept the goat. He had Hong to construct a pen from outbuilding salvage timber in the wind shadow of the north wall, close to the microplot, where the goat's body heat would marginally raise the nighttime temperature of the planting zone. He had Wei Lan redirect the goats grazing to the lower quality thornbush specimens, away from the amendment priority plants. Mao Jing looked at the goat with the expression of someone who had just received a significant upgrade to her input materials. "Structured manure," she said. It was the most positive thing she had said since arrival. On day 38, the women stopped looking like they were dying. It was not a dramatic change. It was the specific shift that happened when caloric intake crossed from subsistence survival into maintenance, when the body stopped consuming its own reserves and began, tentatively, to stabilize. The transit provisions were almost gone, but the microplot's second planting was producing ahead of schedule in the amended soil, and Shenlu had located a secondary moisture zone on the eastern parcel boundary that Wei Cheng had converted to a secondary microplot of 12 square meters, and the goat's manure had accelerated the compost cycle to the point where Mao Jing was producing usable amendment output every 4 days instead of every 8. The caloric math was still negative, they were not eating enough, not by any reasonable standard. But the trajectory had reversed. They were eating more than they had been eating on day 1, not less. And this was visible. Not dramatically. Not to a casual glance. But to anyone who was watching carefully, who had seen the group on day 1 and was comparing it to day 38, the difference was present. Posture. Movement economy. The specific way that people carried tools when they had enough energy to carry them correctly versus when they were conserving every motion. Lao Wen came on day 39. He stood at the western boundary again. He always stood at the western boundary, never came onto the parcel, and looked at the group for a long time. Then he said, "You're feeding them." "We're feeding ourselves," Wei Cheng said. "From what?" "There's nothing in Zone 9 that feeds 20 people." "There is now." Lao Wen looked at him with the expression that had become his characteristic expression in these visits, a mixture of genuine curiosity and something else, something Wei Cheng had been watching develop for 2 weeks and had identified as the specific emotion of a man who had survived by making himself small and was now watching someone refuse to make themselves small and was trying to decide how he felt about that. "Pang is coming in 4 days, Lao Wen said. "Not the monthly inspection. He's coming specifically." He paused. "He asked me what you were eating. I told him I didn't know." "Thank you," Wei Cheng said. "I'm not doing you a favor," Lao Wen said. "I told him I didn't know because I don't know. If I knew, I would have told him." He looked at the parcel again. "He's going to walk the whole perimeter this time. All 4 sides." He laughed. Wei Cheng turned immediately and found Chui Yan. The false point system had been Chui Yan's design, developed over the 3 weeks since her upgrade. 3 visible storage points, easy to find, not hidden, containing real but minimal supplies, a small grain cache in the residential structure's main room, a dried vegetable store in the former well's stone surround, a fuel bundle near the cooking area. Anyone searching would find these and find only these, not nothing, which would be suspicious, but not the real reserves, which were distributed across 4 locations using the no connection between source and storage rule she had established at the beginning. The real reserves were, beneath the goat pen's floor layer, accessible by lifting a specific stone. Inside the compost pit's outer wall, in a clay-sealed cavity that smelled strongly enough of organic material to deter casual investigation. At the eastern perimeter's northern end, beneath a flat stone that was indistinguishable from the 20 similar flat stones around it except by the specific scratch mark that Chui Yan maintained on its underside. And in a cavity beneath the residential structure's east wall foundation, entered from inside the building through a section of floor that had been carefully replaced. Wei Cheng had Chui Yan redistribute the balance between the false points and real reserves in preparation for Pang's visit, more visible at the false points, to give the inspection something to find. Then he addressed the north wall microplot. 8 square meters of growing millet and vegetable regrowth, currently in active production, with visible green above the camouflage plate layer because the plants had grown past the plate height in the sections where the second planting was furthest advanced. Green was visible. Green was the one thing that Zone 9 was not supposed to produce. He did not try to hide the green. He moved it. He had the most advanced plants, the ones with above-plate visible growth, carefully transplanted to the inside of the residential structure, through the east-facing window, where they sat on the internal window ledges and ceramic containers and received the same channeled water through an interior extension of the irrigation system. Inside the building, growing in containers on windowsills, they look like the kind of minimal cultivation that a man in exile might attempt for psychological comfort rather than agricultural production. Outside, behind the north wall, the remaining plants were below plate level. The camouflage held for the less advanced sections. Xiaomei suggested, on the evening before Pang's visit, that they leave one obviously visible but unimportant thing on the north side, something that would draw Pang's attention and satisfy his search instinct without revealing the full plot. She had, specifically, found a small natural depression 3 meters north of the building that held moisture and had produced a volunteer growth of something. She couldn't identify it. Wei Cheng couldn't identify it. That was small, scraggly, clearly struggling, and entirely natural. "Let him find that," she said. "It looks like you tried to grow something there and it's barely surviving." "It's true. It's just not important." Wei Cheng looked at her. She had understood counter-surveillance at a level that he had not explicitly taught. "Yes," he said. Pang's inspection on day 42 was thorough. He walked all 4 sides of the perimeter, which Laowen had warned. He found the 3 visible storage points and examined each with the methodical attention of a man who had done many inspections and knew where people typically hid things. He found the natural depression on the north side with the volunteer plant and crouched at it for a moment. He looked at the interior of the residential structure through the east window and saw the container plants on the windowsills, millet seedlings, clearly visible, clearly intentional. "You're trying to grow inside," he said. "Trying," Wei Cheng said. "Limited success. The light is indirect." Pang looked at the containers. They were the 3 most advanced plants, transplanted the day before. They looked exactly like what Wei Cheng had described: a marginal attempt, modest results, honest about its limitations. He looked at the 20 women. He looked at their condition, better than day 19, clearly better, not dramatically better. The improvement was real and he could see it. "Where is the food coming from?" he said. "Reduced ration," Wei Cheng said. "Transit provisions extended through strict measurement. The well water reduced our hydration losses. We're better than we look on paper." Pang looked at him. At the parcel. At the goat, which was visible in its pen. The goat. "Found it wandering. Came from the west, I assume." Pang looked at the goat with the specific expression of a man calculating whether the goat was his, legally, by proximity. "Manure for the soil," Wei Cheng said. "It's too old for anything else. The manure is more valuable than the meat." Pang laughed without taking the goat, which meant he had calculated its soil amendment value against its immediate consumption value and found the accounting unclear. He would take it later, when the calculation was simpler, or he would leave it and take something else. He stood at his horse before mounting and looked at the parcel one final time. "You're not dying," he said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation with the quality of a man noting a deviation from expected parameters. "Not yet," Wei Cheng said. Pang rode west. Wei Cheng waited until the horse was out of sight. Then he went to the north wall microplot, lifted one of the camouflage plates, and looked at the millet growing beneath it. Advanced past the plate level now in 3 sections, the heads beginning to form on the earliest plants. He looked at it for a moment. Then he went to find Shui Yin. "The cash redistribution after the inspection," he said. "Start tonight. He'll come back in less than a month, and next time he'll look harder." She was already planning it. He could tell from her expression that she had been planning it since Pang rode through the gate. They had passed the first serious inspection. The second one would be designed specifically to find what the first one had missed. He had less than 30 days to make sure there was nothing to find, or to make sure that what was found was exactly what he chose to show. The hot wind season arrived 12 days early. Wei Cheng knew it was early because Laowen told him. The old man appeared at the western boundary on day 49 with the specific urgency of someone delivering information they had decided, after internal debate, was worth delivering. 3 days, Laowen said. "Maybe 4. The sky color this morning, you see it?" Wei Cheng had seen it. The horizon to the southwest had a yellow-white quality that was different from the ordinary haze, denser, lower, the specific optical signature of a heat mass building over the flat deadlands and compressing against the sky. Last year it ran for 18 days, Lawan said. Year before, 22. The well will drop. Whatever you're growing, he stopped. He had been careful, in all his visits, not to explicitly acknowledge that Wei Cheng was growing anything. Whatever you have, protect the water first. He left without waiting for a response. Wei Cheng stood and looked at the southwestern horizon for 60 seconds, converting the timeline into operational decisions. 3 days to prepare. 18 to 22 days of hot wind season. On the other side, either the system held or it didn't. He called everyone together. The preparation ran without pause for 3 days. Xinlu's first task was the subsurface channel extension. The secondary moisture zone she had located on day 32 had been feeding the eastern microplot through a surface channel, which would lose unacceptable amounts of water to evaporation during sustained high heat. She redesigned the delivery system over 18 hours, working with a pointed digging tool and a ceramic guide pipe salvaged from the outbuilding debris, running the channel 15 centimeters below the surface for its final 2 meters before the plot zone. Subsurface delivery meant the water reached the root zone without transiting the heated air surface. Evaporation loss dropped by an amount Wei Cheng could not precisely calculate but which Xinlu estimated, from feeling the moisture levels at both ends of the old and new channels, at approximately 60%. 60% of a limited water supply was the difference between the plot surviving the hot season and the plot failing in week 2. Mao Jing's task was the compost pit preparation. The active organic material needed to keep processing through the heat, which it would, accelerated by temperature, but only if moisture was maintained. She constructed a cover system from salvaged timber and packed clay that insulated the pit's surface, reducing evaporative moisture loss from the active layer. She also identified, through her Stage 2 upgrade capacity, the specific compost zones where the microbial activity was highest and reorganized the pit's input rotation to concentrate organic material there, feeding the most active zones rather than distributing evenly, which produced a higher overall processing rate from the same inputs. Wei Cheng watched her work and understood that what the system had upgraded was not her knowledge of composting but her ability to read the compost itself, to sense which zones were alive and which were merely present. Cui Yen spent the preparation period on a single task, the distributed cache consolidation. During the hot season, external movement would be reduced, the heat made extended outdoor work dangerous, and the reduced movement meant less ability to rotate cache locations or access dispersed stores. She concentrated the critical reserves into the 2 most thermally stable locations, the east wall foundation cavity, which the building's stone mass kept significantly cooler than the outside air, and the compost pit wall cavity, where the microbial heat produced a counterintuitively stable temperature band that prevented the extreme swings of the surface environment. Hongda spent the preparation period on the structural reinforcement of the goat pan and the windbreak walls. The hot wind season brought sustained winds at higher velocity than the salt wind events, not the acute deposition storms but a continuous high-temperature flow that tested structural integrity through persistence rather than impact. She added a secondary brace system to the pen's northern face and extended the eastern perimeter windbreak's height by 40 centimeters at its most exposed sections. Xiaomei spent the preparation period doing something that Wei Cheng did not assign and only understood on the second day when he asked her about it. She was placing flat stones in a specific pattern on the north wall microplot surface, not the camouflage plates, which remained in their functional positions, but additional stones in the gaps between plates, arranged in a pattern that appeared random. Thermal mass distribution, she said when he asked. The plates heat unevenly, the ones at the plot's edge heat faster because they get direct sun longer. That creates a temperature gradient across the plot. The gradient drives moisture movement away from the center. She placed another stone. If I equalize the thermal mass, the temperature stays more consistent across the whole surface. The moisture stays where the roots are. He looked at the stone pattern. It was not random. It was a heat map, expressed in material. How did you know the gradient was causing moisture movement? He said. I felt the soil temperature with my hands at different points and compared it to the moisture reading. She paused. The coolest spots had the most moisture. So I needed to even out the heat. The system updated that evening. Xiaomi upgrade stage 2, thermal and moisture architecture microclimate engineering, active plot temperature variance, minus 67% moisture retention during heat events, estimated plus 40%. The hot wind arrived on the morning of day 52. It was different from the salt wind event in character, where the salt wind had been an acute assault, the hot wind was a sustained condition. The temperature rose through the morning and kept rising, reaching levels that made extended outdoor exposure dangerous by midday. The wind itself was not violent but was continuous and desiccating. It pulled moisture from every exposed surface with the patient efficiency of a long-term process rather than a dramatic event. By day 2 of the hot season, the well's output had dropped. Not to zero, to approximately 60% of its pre-season rate. The groundwater table had dropped as the surface heat penetrated downward, reducing the pressure differential that drove the seepage. Wei Cheng had expected this from Lao Wen's warning, and the reduced output hit a rationing system that had already been adjusted for it. Drinking water maintained its survival level. Technical water reduced to the subsurface channel delivery only, no surface application, no supplementary watering. The plants would live or die on what the channels delivered and what the subsurface moisture provided from below. The goat stopped producing manure at its previous rate on day 4 of the hot season. This was a biological response to the heat stress. The animal's digestive output reduced when its water intake reduced. Wei Cheng had Shenlu identify the coolest zone on the parcel, a section of the north wall shadow that retained the most thermal stability through the day, and moved the goat's pen to that location, giving it access to the best available conditions. It was not comfortable. It was alive and producing at reduced rate, which was what mattered. On day 6, Weilan found the first insect damage. The native thorn bushes on the eastern perimeter had a beetle species living in their stems, dormant through the cooler season, active in heat. The beetles had been present all along, invisible, and the heat had triggered their active phase. They were not eating the thorn bushes, they ate the roots of the plants growing adjacent to the thorn bushes, which meant they were eating the roots of the amendment-stimulated regrowth that the Eastern Windbreak planting program depended on. Wei Cheng looked at the damage pattern, specific to the root zone, spreading outward from the thorn bush stems, affecting a radius of approximately 40 centimeters around each bush. He made a decision that felt like loss: remove the thorn bushes in the sections where the windbreak was most critical and replace them with the stone windbreak construction that Hongde had been building along the northern perimeter. The stone wall was less biologically functional but immune to beetle vectors. The thorn bushes in the lower priority southern sections could remain, the beetle damage there affected less critical growth. Hongde began the stone extension on day 7. She worked in the early morning and late evening hours when the heat was manageable, resting through the midday peak in the building's east wall shade. This was the cost of the soil renewal path he had not chosen. If he had upgraded Maojing toward accelerated expansion rather than Chuiyin toward concealed storage, he would have more soil capacity now but less reserve, and the reserve was the only reason the hot season's reduced well output had not already forced emergency rationing. The system did not let him miss this. Note, storage path choice, day 20 current reserve, 23 days at crisis ration without storage upgrade, estimated 4 days at crisis ration hot season duration, 18 to 22 days assessment, storage choice is currently preventing system failure. He read it once and closed it. On day 9 of the hot season, the system presented the next upgrade choice. Milestone, sustained operation under environmental stress system integrity, 71%, holding under crisis conditions specialists performing above baseline, 5 of 5 choose 1, Shen Lu Stage 3, deep groundwater access. Secondary well site identification. Potential to restore full water output during hot season and beyond. Beef Hong Da Stage 1, structural fortification. Construction efficiency doubled. Defensive architecture, walls, barriers, protected zones. Potential, perimeter security before next inspection. CYYAN Stage 2, extended reserve architecture. Cache capacity doubled. Spoilage resistance increased. 60-day reserve potential. Wei Cheng sat with this choice through the midday rest period. Stage 3 for Shenlu would find him a second water source. During a hot season where the primary well was at 60% output, this was the most immediately critical need. But the second well would be a permanent feature that would be visible on Pang's next inspection. A second functional well on a holding that was supposed to be deadland was not an invisible asset. Stage 1 for Hongde would fortify the perimeter before Pang's next visit and before whatever came after Pang, which Wei Cheng was increasingly certain would be something more serious than a monthly oversight inspection. But defensive architecture solved a future problem while the present problem was water. Stage 2 for Chuiyin would double reserve capacity, giving him a buffer through the rest of the hot season and beyond. But the reserve capacity was already holding, it was doing its job. Doubling a working system was less valuable than fixing a failing one. He chose Shenlu. And he chose with full awareness of what it would cost. The second well would be visible, would raise questions, would accelerate Pang's transition from suspicious to actively threatening. He was trading security for water, which was the only trade that kept the system alive. The upgrade activated immediately. Shenlu was at the eastern perimeter when it happened. She went still for a moment, both hands flat on the ground, with the specific expression of someone receiving a signal they had been straining to hear and had suddenly heard clearly. She stayed that way for 4 minutes. Then she walked directly to a point 12 meters north of the residential structure's east wall, pressed both hands against the ground, and said, "Here." 4 meters down. It's not the same source as the main well, it's a separate vein. Smaller. Consistent. How consistent? Wei Cheng said. It doesn't fluctuate with the surface temperature. It's deeper than the heat penetration zone. She paused. It won't drop in the hot season. He looked at the location. 12 meters north of the east wall. Inside the eastern microplot zone, inside the perimeter, not visible from the western approach. Not invisible from a full perimeter inspection. He began digging that afternoon, in the heat, in the early evening window, with Hongda on the primary excavation and Shenlu directing the angle and depth by hand reading the soil as they went down. They hit water on day 11 of the hot season at 3 meters and 80 centimeters, just short of Shenlu's depth estimate, which meant the heat had compressed the water table marginally upward from its cooler season position. The water was cleaner than the main well. Significantly cleaner. Wei Cheng looked at it and understood that what they had found was not just a backup source. It was a better source, one that the main well's mineral content had been masking as an option because the main well existed and was being used and there had been no reason to look further. He set up a secondary filtration column immediately and had Chui Yen add the new water source's location to the cache and reserve mapping, not as a stored resource but as an infrastructure element, something that needed to be accounted for in the concealment architecture. On day 15 of the hot season, the system status showed, hot season, day 15 of estimated 18 to 22 main well, 58% output, stable at reduced level secondary well, active, 100% output, better quality microplot north wall, 89% survival rate, Xiaomei thermal management holding microplot east wall, 76% survival rate, beetle damage contained compost cycle, 71% efficiency, heat stressed but functional goat, alive, reduced output, stable reserve, 19 days at crisis ration group health, maintained. No losses. Wei Cheng read each line. No losses. Day 67 of a holding that the Empire had designed to fail before day 20. He looked at his 5 specialists, each of them doing something that had not been their function when they arrived, each of them doing it with a competence that had come from weeks of sustained application and 2 rounds of system upgrades, and thought about what Lawan had said on the first visit. We watch each other and count the days. The days were at 67 and rising. On day 18, the hot wind broke. The sky changed overnight, the yellow-white compression at the horizon dissipated, the temperature dropped 8 degrees in 4 hours, and the wind that came in from the northeast tasted of nothing at all. Wei Cheng stood outside in the pre-dawn silence of the broken heat season and took an inventory of what remained. The secondary well. The expanded compost system. 8 square meters of growing crop, 76 to 89% intact after the worst season zone 9 produced. A goat, alive. 5 specialists with upgraded capacities. A concealed reserve sufficient for 19 days. A group of 20 women, none lost, all functional. And a second well that Pang would see on his next inspection. The season had been survived. The next problem was already here. He went to find Shenlu. The second well, he said. When Pang comes, what does he see? She thought about it. A hole in the ground, she said. If it's covered the same way as everything else, he sees what you show him. And if he tests it? Then he sees water. She paused. But he already knows we have the main well. A second water source on a holding this size isn't impossible. It's unlikely. It becomes a question of whether he believes you found it or whether he believes you always had it and were hiding it. Wei Cheng looked at the secondary well's location, 12 meters north of the east wall, inside the working zone. We weren't hiding it, he said. We found it during the hot season when the main well dropped. We dug for a backup source because we needed one. That's a true statement. It is, Shenlu said. Make sure the digging evidence looks like emergency work, he said. Not planned infrastructure. Rough edges, tool marks visible, no lining yet. She understood immediately. The difference between a well that had been dug in crisis and a well that had been planned and concealed was visible in the work quality. Emergency digging looked different from deliberate construction. They would preserve the emergency character of the excavation rather than improving it. He looked at the northeast horizon where the heat season had broken. Pang's next inspection was approximately 12 days away. 12 days to decide how much of what they had built would be visible, how much would be hidden, and how to frame the difference between the two in a way that a suspicious overseer would accept as the natural consequence of desperate men doing what desperate men did to survive. The hot season was over. The inspection season was beginning. Pang came on day 79 with 4 men. Not the single guard of previous visits, 4, which was a statement before he dismounted. 2 were administrative witnesses, which meant he intended to make a formal record of whatever he found. 2 were the kind of men whose function was not administrative. Wei Cheng had been watching the western track since dawn. When Shenlu, positioned at the eastern perimeter with sightlines to the western approach, raised her hand in the prearranged signal, he had 12 minutes. He used 10 of them. The secondary well's emergency character was already established: rough edges, visible tool marks, no stone lining, a bucket system that looked improvised rather than constructed. He had Xiaomei scatter the digging debris more widely around the rim, the way debris scattered when people were working fast rather than carefully. It looked like desperation work. It looked correct. The north wall microplot's current growth, third planting, 14 days advanced, the most productive the plot had ever been, went under the camouflage plates in the sections closest to the building's corners, where inspection sightlines would be direct. The interior windowsill containers received 3 additional plants, upgrading the visible indoor attempt from modest to slightly less modest. A man who saw more plants inside would spend less attention looking for plants outside. Cui Yen moved nothing from the real caches. The real caches had not moved in 6 days and would not move today. Any recent disturbance around a cache location was visible to a searching eye as disturbed soil, compression patterns, the small signs of recent human activity. The false points were already stocked at the level she had calculated, enough to be credible, not enough to be worth confiscating entirely. Hongde took her position at the well, not aggressively, simply present, doing the routine bucket work she did every morning. Her presence at the well communicated that it was an ordinary working location, not a sensitive one. Wei Cheng was at the cooking area when Pang came through the western approach, which was the correct location. A man at his cooking fire was a man who was not nervous about being found at his cooking fire. Pang dismounted and handed his reins to one of the functional men without looking at him. He stood for a moment and looked at the parcel with the comprehensive attention of a man who had spent 12 days preparing for this. Administrative survey, he said. Formal record. All resources, all labor, all infrastructure. He looked at Wei Cheng. You won't mind. I don't mind, Wei Cheng said. The 2 witnesses produced counting boards and ink. Pang began at the western approach and moved systematically, not the wandering assessment of previous visits but a structured circuit, north wall first, then east, then south, then the building interior. He was following a plan he had made before arriving. Wei Cheng walked with him. Not obstructively, alongside, as a holder accompanying an inspector, which was normal practice and which also meant he could observe what Pang observed and register what Pang's expression communicated about what he was finding. The north wall, Pang crouched at the microplot area and looked at the camouflage plate surface. He lifted one plate. Below it, soil. Amended soil. Clearly, the color and texture were different from the surrounding ground, darker, with the cohesion of material that had been worked. But the planting in that section was the least advanced of the plot, and the small shoots present were below the plate surface and not immediately visible. Pang looked at the soil. He pressed his fingers into it. Amended, he said. We've been working the soil with compost output, Wei Cheng said. The salt neutralization is slow. This section has had the most amendment time. What are you growing? Trying to grow. The germination rate in alkaline soil is low. We have some millet starts, you can see them on the windowsills inside. Pang looked at the plate surface. He lifted 2 more plates, finding the same pattern: amended soil, minimal visible growth. He did not lift the plates in the central section, where the third planting's most advanced plants were growing at 4 to 6 centimeters and would have been immediately visible. He moved to the east wall. The secondary well stopped him. He stood at its rim and looked down, then looked at the debris pattern around it, then looked at Wei Cheng. New, he said. Dug during the hot season. The main well dropped to 60% output. We needed a backup. You dug a well. We dug a hole until we found water, Wei Cheng said. Whether it qualifies as a well depends on your classification standard. We haven't lined it. We haven't built the surround. We have a bucket on a rope. One of the witnesses wrote something on his counting board. Pang crouched at the rim the way he had crouched at the microplot, pressing his fingers against the inner wall, reading the excavation character. The rough edges, the tool marks, the debris scatter. It looked like what it was supposed to look like: emergency work by people who needed water and had no time for craftsmanship. Water quality, he said. Better than the main well. Less mineral content. Pang looked at him with the expression of a man who found this answer slightly too convenient. A desperate holding finding better water than its original source was either good fortune or evidence of prior knowledge. You didn't know it was there before the hot season, he said. I knew the subsurface moisture was higher on the eastern side, Wei Cheng said. I didn't know there was a distinct vein. We found it at 3.8 meters. If I had known it was there from the beginning, I would have dug to it from the beginning. This was true. He let Pang sit with its truth for a moment. Pang moved on. The building interior was the most thorough section of the inspection. Pang went through it systematically: the main sleeping area, the storage room, the cooking space, the closed end. He found the visible false cache in the main room, a grain store of approximately 4 kilograms of millet, the dried vegetable store at the former well surround, the fuel bundle. He had the witnesses record each. He looked at the windowsill plant's 8 containers now, a combination of the original 3 and the additions from the morning. Millet seedlings at various stages, clearly receiving care, clearly producing a marginal return. This is your crop, he said. This is part of it. The outdoor plot is earlier stage, the soil work is slower. Pang looked at the containers for a long time. 8 containers of seedlings were not a food production system. They were the kind of thing a man did when he had very little to do and needed to believe he was doing something. They were psychologically comprehensible as the action of a failing holder rather than a succeeding one. Wei Cheng had calculated this response and was watching it register in Pang's expression. Then Pang said, the labor. He went outside and had the 2 functional men position themselves at the north and south ends of the building while he conducted a formal labor count. All 20 women, present, in their working positions. He walked along the line and looked at each of them. He stopped at Hongda. She was at the main well, bucket in hand, looking at him with the flat assessment that was her default expression. She's primary labor, he said to Wei Cheng. Construction and water management. Yes. Pang looked at Hongda's hands, the calluses, the specific wear pattern of sustained heavy work. He looked at the perimeter wall visible beyond the building's east corner, at its quality, at the height extension that Hongda had added before the hot season. She built that wall? She designed and built it. The curved section at the south end was her own modification. Pang looked at the wall. At Hongda. A woman who could design a load-bearing curved wind deflection wall was not standard agricultural labor. She was skilled labor, and skilled labor on a Zone 9 holding was an administrative anomaly. He made a note, which was the thing Wei Cheng had been watching for and had been unable to prevent. Hongda's competence was visible in her work and her work was visible in the wall. There was no camouflage for craft. He moved to Shunlu. She was at the eastern perimeter, crouched at the ground in her usual position. What is she doing? Pang said. Soil moisture assessment. She has a sensitivity for moisture gradient in the soil useful for irrigation placement. Pang looked at her. She finds water. She finds wet soil. It's a useful instinct. Pang was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the secondary well. She found it. During the hot season, when we needed it. Yes. He wrote something else. Wei Cheng understood what was being written. Two specialist women, one who built better than expected, one who found water, were being catalogued. Not confiscated yet. Catalogued. A holder who catalogued assets before confiscating them was a holder who was deciding whether the confiscation was worth the administrative process. This was the cost of the hot season's successful operation. The women's upgraded capacities were expressed in their work, and their work was visible, and visible competence attracted administrative attention in the empire's labor economy. He could not hide competence. He could only make the competence look like insufficient grounds for confiscation, too embedded in the specific system of this specific holding to be extractable at value. Pang's formal assessment took 3 hours. At the end of it, he stood with his witnesses at the western approach and reviewed his counting board. The record showed 4 kilograms of grain. Dried vegetables, small quantity. 1 elderly goat. 2 functional wells. 20 labor units present and accounted for. 1 residential structure, partially repaired. Agricultural development in early stage. He looked at Wei Cheng. Contribution assessment, he said. Given the documented resource level, this month's contribution is set at 1 kilogram of grain, 1 labor day from your primary construction worker. 1 kilogram of grain from a 4 kilogram visible store, leaving 3. 1 labor day from Hongda. He had taken what he could see. He had taken it proportionally rather than aggressively, which meant he was managing the holding as an ongoing source rather than exhausting it. A man who took proportionally was a man who planned to return. Wei Cheng had 1 kilogram of grain transferred to Pang's supply bag from the visible cache. He confirmed Hongda's labor day. She would go to the overseer's station tomorrow, do the specified work, and return. Pang mounted. He looked at the parcel one final time with the expression of a man who was certain he had missed something and could not identify what. The soil work, he said. If it produces. If it produces, Wei Cheng said. The contribution scale adjusts upward with demonstrated yield. You understand that. I understand the regulation. Pang rode west. Wei Cheng waited until the inspection party was beyond the western boundary. Then he walked to the north wall microplot and lifted the central section plates. The third planting's most advanced plants, millet at 6 centimeters, vegetable regrowth at the wall base running to 10 centimeters in the most established section, the onion regrowth producing visible bulb formation at soil level. 43 square centimeters of active food production that Pang had walked within 2 meters of and had not seen. The system updated, inspection outcome, past visible resources, assessed and partially levied hidden resources, undetected labor nodes, 2 flagged for administrative interest, Hongda, Shenlu levy cost, 1 kilogram grain false cache, 1 labor day Hongda real system integrity, 100%, no critical resource exposed warning, administrative interest in specialist labor is now recorded. Flagged labor units are at elevated risk of requisition on next contact. Recommendation, make specialist value illegible from their persons. Embed it in the system. Wei Cheng read the warning twice. Make it illegible from their persons. Embed it in the system. Hongda's wall building skill was visible in the wall. If she was taken and no one else knew how she built, the method was gone. But if the method was documented, if the wall's design principles were written down, if Xiaomei understood the thermal logic behind Hongda's construction choices, if the knowledge lived in the system rather than only in the person, then taking Hongda removed a hand but not a mind. He went to find Mao Jing, who had been assigned no role in the inspection performance and had spent the 3 hours continuing her compost rotation with the focused professionalism of someone who had decided the inspection was not her problem. I need you to start teaching, he said. She looked up. Teaching what? Everything you know. Not to everyone, to one person. Someone who can carry the method if you can't. Mao Jing looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a woman who understood, completely, what he meant by if you can't. She looked across the parcel to where Wei Lan was working the thornbush amendment zone with the careful attention she had developed over weeks of close plant observation. Her, Mao Jing said. She already understands organic response. I've been watching her. Start tomorrow, Wei Cheng said. He went to each of the other 4 specialists with the same instruction. The knowledge had to live in the system. As long as it lived only in the person was a target. The moment it lived in the system, taking the person cost less than taking the knowledge, and the knowledge would stay. Pang had come to find what he could take. He had taken a kilogram of grain and 1 day's labor from a woman whose real value he had seen and not understood. He would come back. Next time he would come with a requisition order for the labor units he had catalogued. Wei Cheng had until then to make sure that when Pang took Hongda or Shenlu or whoever he targeted, he would find that he had taken a person and left the system intact. That was the only defense against a power that could simply claim what it wanted. Make what it wanted worth less than what it couldn't see. Lao Wen came 3 days after the inspection. This was different from his previous visits. He had always come to observe, standing at the western boundary, delivering information at the cost of nothing, leaving before the weight of what he was watching became something he had to respond to. This time he came onto the parcel. He walked through the western approach without stopping at the boundary and came to where Wei Cheng was working at the compost pit extension and stood there until Wei Cheng looked up. He was carrying a bundle. Cloth wrapped around something flat and hard, a ceramic container, from the weight of how he held it. "My remaining grain store," he said. He held the bundle out. 3 kilograms. Pang's assessment took everything above this. "Next month they'll take this." Wei Cheng looked at the bundle. Then at Lao Wen. "What do you want?" he said. "To not die next month," Lao Wen said. "My holding has 4 people left. 2 can't work. I have no water I can count on, no soil that grows anything, and an overseer who has decided that Zone 9's eastern parcels are worth more attention than they used to be." He paused. "Because of you." This last part was stated without accusation. It was simply the causal chain as Lao Wen understood it. Wei Cheng's holding had survived past all reasonable expectation, Pang had become more attentive to the zone as a result, and Lao Wen's marginal operation was now receiving the increased scrutiny it had previously avoided by being invisible. "You made us visible," Lao Wen said. "Both of us." Wei Cheng looked at the bundle. 3 kilograms of grain, 2 non-functional laborers, 2 functional ones, and a man who had spent years making himself smaller and had finally reached the floor of how small he could go. He took the bundle. "Come tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring the 4 people. I'll assess what they can do." Lao Wen looked at him with the expression of a man who had not expected this answer and was not certain he trusted it. "What are the terms?" he said. "I'll tell you tomorrow, after I've seen what I'm working with," Wei Cheng said. "The terms will be proportional to contribution. That's all I can tell you now." Lao Wen left without the bundle. The system registered the change the following morning when Lao Wen arrived with his 4 people. Holding population, 25, expanded new labor capacity, plus 4 units, 2 functional, 2 limited new resource input, 3 kilograms grain. Lao Wen's accumulated knowledge of Zone 9 terrain, unquantified expansion threshold reached, choose holding development path, a core fortification, consolidate current parcel. Deepen existing systems. Increase concealment. Maximum security, minimum visibility. Risk, fixed capacity, fixed ceiling. B. Territorial expansion, claim adjacent parcels eastward. Convert dead land using established methods. Significant increase in production capacity. Risk, visibility increase, administrative exposure, Pang's attention scale. C. Network formation, maintain core parcel. Establish informal supply and resource sharing relationships with other zone holdings. Distributed growth without formal expansion. Risk, coordination complexity, loyalty management. Wei Cheng read it during the assessment of Lao Wen's 4 people, which he conducted simultaneously, reading the system while watching them move, watching Mao Jing, watching the 2 functional ones, watching Shenlu's expression when she stood near the one elderly man who walked with the specific gait of someone who had done water-related work in his history. The assessment results: 1 woman, perhaps 50, who had been a storage keeper in a household before exile. Chui Yan looked at her hands and her counting instinct and gave Wei Cheng a slight nod. 1 man, the older one, who had spent 20 years as an irrigation maintenance worker for a mid-tier agricultural operation before a corruption accusation had landed him in Zone 9 with Lao Wen. 2 genuinely limited, 1 with a persistent illness that reduced her work capacity to light tasks, 1 with an injury to her right hand that would not fully recover. The irrigation man changed the calculation. His name was Old Fong, and within 2 hours of being on the parcel he had looked at the secondary well, the channel system, the subsurface delivery line that Shenlu had installed before the hot season, and had said, not to Wei Cheng, to the channel itself, in the tone of a professional identifying work quality, the inlet angle is 3 degrees too steep. You're losing 8% of flow volume to turbulence at the first bend. Wei Cheng had not known the inlet angle was 3 degrees too steep. Shenlu had not known. Old Fong had known it from looking at the water movement for 30 seconds. He chose network formation. Not because it was the safest option, it wasn't. And not because it was the fastest path to scale, it wasn't that either. He chose it because the irrigation man had just demonstrated the principle that had driven every decision since day one: the most valuable resource in Zone 9 was not land or water or grain. It was functional knowledge held by people who had been discarded by the empire as worthless. Territorial expansion would make the holding legible to Pang. A larger footprint was a more visible footprint, and visibility meant levy, and levy at scale meant Pang would bring a requisition order rather than a contribution assessment. Core fortification would protect what he had built but would cap it. The ceiling of a single parcel's production capacity was not enough, not if the network of exiled holders in Zone 9's eastern sector was going to experience the same pressure from Pang's increased attentiveness that Lao Wen had just described. But a network holdings that shared knowledge, shared surplus, shared the burden of concealment without formally combining, was distributed in the same way that Chui Yan's cash system was distributed. No single point of failure. No single legible target. A system that looked, from Pang's administrative perspective, like a collection of marginal struggling holdings, while functioning, in practice, as a coordinated resource network. He told Lao Wen the terms that evening. The terms were not charitable and were not meant to be. Lao Wen's holding would maintain its separate administrative identity, its own registration, its own inspection record, its own contribution assessment. This was essential. A formally combined holding would require a new administrative registration, which would require Pang's involvement, which would expose the consolidation. Separate identities meant separate inspections, which meant Pang could not assess the combined resource base. In exchange for access to the water network, specifically, Old Fong's expertise applied to improving the channel efficiency of both parcels, and Shenlu's moisture gradient mapping extended to include Lao Wen's terrain. Lao Wen's 2 functional workers would contribute 2 days per week to Wei Cheng's parcel operations. The grain from Lao Wen's bundle went into Chui Yan's reserve system, distributed across the existing cache network with a notation of its source and Lao Wen's claim to it, not absorbed, not taken, held in common storage with attributed ownership. This distinction mattered. A man who gave grain to a common reserve and retained his claim to it was in a different relationship to that reserve than a man whose grain had been taken. Lao Wen agreed to the terms with the careful expression of someone who was calculating whether they were fair and had decided that fair was not the relevant standard was survivable, and these were survivable. Old Fong spent the first 3 days of his association with the parcel redesigning the channel inlet angles. The flow efficiency improvement was 11%. Not the 8 he had estimated, 11, because he found 2 additional inefficiencies beyond the inlet angle once he was working inside the system rather than observing it from outside. The system updated, network node established, LAO when holding combined effective resource, plus 23% visibility increase, minimal, separate administrative identities maintained. Old Fong integration, irrigation efficiency plus 11% new specialist path detected, Old Fong hydraulic architecture upgrade eligibility. Pending 1 completed irrigation cycle. The second approach came on day 89. Not from the west, from the south, which was a direction no one had come from before. A woman, alone, on foot, with the specific movement quality of someone who had been walking for a long time and had decided that arrival was more important than the appearance of strength. She stopped at the southern perimeter and stood there. Hongde, who had developed the habit of knowing where every approach to the parcel was at all times, came to Wei Cheng without being asked. He went to the southern perimeter. The woman was perhaps 30, with the condition of someone who had been in Zone 9 longer than Lao Wen and had been alone for most of it. Her hands were the hands of someone who had been doing agricultural work, real agricultural work, not domestic work, for years. Calloused in the specific pattern of digging and planting rather than carrying and lifting. She said, I had a holding 4 kilometers south. Pang assessed it 2 weeks ago. He took everything above survival minimum and left me with 1 other person and a note saying next month's assessment would include labor evaluation. Labor evaluation. The administrative language for potential requisition. What do you know how to do? Wei Cheng said. She looked at him. I've been growing things in alkaline soil for 3 years. I failed the first 2 years. The third year I found a method using layered mineral amendment, specific stone types ground to powder, layered beneath the organic amendment, to buffer the pH before the organic material goes in. She paused. It works. Pang has never seen the results because I keep the productive zone inside the old building foundation where the walls block the sightlines. Mao Jing had appeared at Wei Cheng's shoulder at some point during this speech. He had not heard her arrive. The stone type, Mao Jing said. What stone? The gray-white stone in the deeper substrate. Below the clay layer. It has a calcium content that neutralizes the sodium in the alkaline crust, Mao Jing said. Yes. She looked at Wei Cheng. I didn't know the stone layer had that property. I've been working above it. The woman from the south, her name was Chen Rui, she said, when Wei Cheng asked, had found something that Mao Jing's upgrade had not found, because Mao Jing's upgrade was organic focused and Chen Rui had approached the soil problem from the mineral side. 2 upgrade paths, each finding half of a complete solution, neither finding the whole thing alone. Wei Cheng looked at the parcel. At its 89 days of built capacity. At the 2 wells, the 3 microplots, the compost system, the cache network, the specialist team, the eastern perimeter wall, the covered hot season infrastructure. And he looked at the edge of the parcel's southern boundary, where the alkaline soil extended in the same flat expanse that extended in every direction, and thought about what the combination of Mao Jing's organic method, Chen Lu's moisture mapping, Old Feng's channel engineering, and Chen Rui's mineral amendment technique could do to it. Not the single parcel. The zone. The Empire had classified this territory as Marginal Development Zone 9 because no one had ever applied the correct combination of knowledge to it. The knowledge had existed in the people the Empire had sent here as punishment, in the accumulated trial and error of exiles who had each found one piece of the method and died or given up before finding the rest. He was, apparently, the person who collected the pieces. He told Chen Rui the same terms he had told Lao Wan. Separate administrative identity. Shared knowledge network. Contributed labor. Distributed reserve participation. She accepted without the deliberation that Lao Wan had needed. She had less to deliberate with. That evening Wei Cheng sat at the north wall microplot in the cooling hour after sunset and looked at the growth, 4th planting now, the most advanced the plot had ever produced, with the combined benefit of Old Feng's channel improvement, Xiaomei's thermal management, and Mao Jing's accelerated compost output. The system showed, day 89 holding population, 26 core parcel plus 5 network nodes, 2 specialist capacity, 6-5 upgraded, 1 pending combined production capacity, estimated 340% of day 1 potential visibility status, elevated network activity increasing detection risk pangs administrative interest, high note. You are no longer managing a survival operation. You are managing the beginning of a territorial resource network. These require different decisions. What you have built cannot be hidden much longer. The question is no longer whether it will be seen. The question is what it looks like when it is. Wei Cheng read it and thought about Pang's next visit, which was approximately 10 days away, and about the labor requisition order that Pang was almost certainly preparing, and about the administrative machinery that the Empire used to absorb things that had become too valuable to leave alone. He had built the network to be illegible, distributed, attributed, without a single legible center. But networks had patterns, and patterns were readable to anyone who looked long enough. Pang had been looking for 89 days. He was going to stop being confused soon. Wei Cheng looked at the 4th planting's most advanced millet heads, nearly ready for harvest, the most productive yield the plot had produced, and made a decision that he had been building toward for 2 weeks without naming it. The network needed a face. Not a hidden system, a declared one. Not a secret holding, a registered one, with a function that the Empire's administrative framework recognized and that Pang's requisition logic could not easily dissolve. He would need to get to the administrative center before Pang got to him. He would need to register something that looked like compliance and functioned like independence. He had 10 days to understand exactly what that registration needed to say. He picked up his count sheet, Shui Yan's format, adopted because it was better than any system he had developed himself, and began writing. The registration document took 7 days to write. Not because the language was difficult. Wei Cheng had spent 8 years writing administrative documents for the Bureau of Agricultural Survey, and the Empire's registration framework was a system he understood from the inside. The difficulty was not language. It was architecture. The document needed to declare enough to be credible, protect enough to be safe, and frame the holdings function in a category that the Empire's administrative logic would recognize without triggering the absorption reflex that any valuable asset automatically provoked. He settled on a category that existed in the Bureau's own framework and was rarely used because the conditions that created it were rare: reclamation demonstration holding. A classification designed for cases where exiled holders had made measurable progress on marginal land, entitling them to reduced levy assessment in exchange for documented methodology that the Bureau could apply elsewhere. It was, in the Empire's own language, a protected category. Not protected from oversight, protected from the kind of arbitrary requisition that Pang's labor evaluation note had threatened. A reclamation demonstration holding operated under Bureau of Agricultural Survey jurisdiction rather than local overseer jurisdiction, which meant Pang's authority over it was superseded by a higher administrative body. The document required evidence. Wei Cheng had 96 days of evidence in Chui Yan's count sheets, Mao Jing's compost records, Shenlu's moisture mapping notes, Oldfang's channel engineering documentation, and Xiaomei's thermal management logs. He had the soil amendment methodology in complete written form. He had yield records that demonstrated production in soil the Bureau's own surveys had classified as non-viable. He sent the document to the administrative center on day 96, carried by Chen Rui's one remaining mobile person from her southern holding, who had a reason to travel to the center that predated the document and would not attract attention as a courier. Then he waited. Pang came on day 98. He came with 6 men this time, and the 6th man was carrying a document with a red administrative seal, the requisition order that Wei Cheng had been preparing for since day 79. It named 2 labor units by physical description, 1 female, exceptional construction capacity, distinctive build. 1 female, water location sensitivity, eastern perimeter assignment. Hongda and Shenlu. Wei Cheng read the order when Pang handed it to him and read it with the expression of a man receiving information he found unfortunate but not unexpected. Then he handed Pang the Bureau of Agricultural Survey registration confirmation that had arrived, by return courier, on day 97, 1 day before Pang's visit, a margin so narrow that Wei Cheng had spent the evening of day 96 sitting with the count sheet and running numbers he couldn't change, waiting. Pang looked at the registration document. He read it with the expression of a man whose tool had just failed to engage the surface it was designed for. Reclamation Demonstration Holding, Zone 9 Eastern Sector. Registered under Bureau of Agricultural Survey jurisdiction. Labor units designated as specialist methodology holders exempt from local requisition under Bureau Regulation 14, Article 7, Preservation of Reclamation Knowledge Assets. He read it twice. "You were a bureau man," he said. "I was," Wei Cheng said. Pang looked at the document. At the holding. At the 26 people distributed across a parcel that looked, from the western approach, substantially different from the parcel he had first visited 98 days ago, different in the specific way that a living system looked different from a dying one, even when the living system was doing everything it could to appear modest. The eastern perimeter wall. The 2-well system. The organized labor positions. The goat, now with 2 kids born 3 weeks prior, in a pen that had been extended and improved. The compost system visible as a structured operation rather than a hole in the ground. The women who moved with the efficiency of people who had specific functions and knew them. He looked at all of it and understood. Wei Cheng could see him understanding that what he was looking at was not what he had been managing for 98 days. He had been managing what he thought was a slow death. He had been taxing it, monitoring it, planning to strip it of its most useful components when the stripping became worth the effort. He had been wrong about what it was, and the document in his hand was the evidence of how wrong, and the bureau seal on the document meant that his error was now recorded in an administrative system above his authority level. He folded the requisition order. "The bureau assessment," he said. "When does it come?" "The registration confirmation indicates a survey visit within 60 days, Wei Cheng said. "Standard Reclamation Review Protocol." Pang mounted without another word and rode west with his 6 men and his folded requisition order and the specific posture of a man who had lost a contest he had not known he was in until the moment he lost it. That evening the system updated. Not in the usual dry panel format, the text that appeared had a different quality, longer, less transactional. As if the system was stepping back to describe rather than instruct. Day 98 Arc 1 complete survival window on Day 1, 19 days. Current day, 98. Days beyond initial estimate, 79. Population, 26 core, 5 network, 2 affiliate holdings. Water sources, 2 functional wells, 1 subsurface channel network. Production, for active microplots, combined area 31 square meters. Compost output, sufficient for 60 square meters of amendment per month. Livestock, 1 goat, 2 kids. Reserve, 34 days at full ration. Specialist nodes, 6 upgraded, 2 pending, 1 external Chen Rue. Knowledge documentation, complete and distributed. Administrative status, reclamation demonstration holding bureau jurisdiction. What you arrived with, a dead parcel, a transit provision, and 20 people the Empire had decided were worth nothing. What you built, a closed-loop agricultural system, a distributed resource network, a specialist team, a concealment architecture, and a legal framework that transferred jurisdictional authority away from the actor most likely to destroy what you built. What comes next is not more of the same. The Bureau of Agricultural Survey will send an assessor in 60 days. That assessor will see what Peng never fully saw. The question is not whether the Bureau will want what you have built. The question is whether you will be the one who defines what it is before they define it for you. Beyond the Bureau, the Empire's food supply networks are under pressure from the same army procurement operations that created the conditions in other districts. Zone 9's eastern sector, if it produces at the rate its current trajectory indicates, will become visible to supply chain administrators within 2 harvest cycles. You are no longer a failed exile on dead land. You are the beginning of the only functioning agricultural development operation in this zone. The Empire discarded you here because it believed nothing could grow. In 60 days, an imperial assessor will stand on soil that was classified as non-viable and will look at yields that the Bureau's own survey methodology said were impossible. Arc 2 begins with that meeting. Prepare accordingly. Wei Cheng closed the panel and sat in the evening quiet of the north wall shadow. Around him the holding ran its evening cycle. Mao Jing and the storage woman from Lao Wen's group were at the compost pit, running the input rotation in the last light. Old Fong was at the secondary well, adjusting the bucket mechanism with the focused precision of a man for whom every inefficiency was a personal matter. Xiaomei was at the microplot, doing the nightly moisture reading that had become her fixed practice since day 8. Wei Lan was at the thornbush perimeter, checking the amendment response on the latest round of native plants. Hongda was at the eastern perimeter wall, adding stone to a section she had been extending for a week, working in the cool evening hours the way she always worked, steady, without announcement, building something that would outlast the immediate need for it. Shenlu was at the southern boundary, hands flat on the ground, reading something in the soil that no one else could read. Chui Yan was inside, updating the count sheets with the evening's numbers. Lao Wen was sitting at the western edge of the parcel, on the holding side of the boundary for the first time, sitting, not standing and watching. He was eating from the shared evening ration with the expression of a man who had given up being small and had not yet decided what to be instead. Chen Rue was at the southern microplot extension, the newest zone, working the mineral amendment technique into soil that had been identified by the combined methodology she and Mao Jing had developed together in 3 days of professional conversation that had the energy of 2 people who had each been half right for years and had just met the other half. 26 people. Each of them with a function. Each function documented. Each document distributed. The knowledge living in the system rather than only in the people. Wei Cheng looked at it all and thought about the Bureau assessor coming in 60 days. The assessor would arrive with the Bureau's classification frameworks, its yield measurement protocols, its standard methodology for assessing reclamation progress. Those frameworks had been written for conditions that looked different from this. They described what reclamation looked like when it was performed with full resources, proper seed stock, engineering support, administrative backing. This did not look like that. It looked like something that had no official category, a survival operation that had closed enough loops to become something else, built from people the Empire had classified as expendable on land the Empire had classified as worthless. The Bureau's assessor would need to find a box for it in the Empire's administrative structure. Wei Cheng intended to be the one who handed him the box. He had 60 days. He knew the Bureau's framework from the inside. He knew which categories had jurisdiction protections and which had levy exposure. He knew how reclamation holdings were typically absorbed, which methods had been used in the 3 historical cases he had processed in his Bureau years, and which of those absorptions had preserved the operational integrity of what was absorbed versus which had dismantled it by extracting the people and leaving the method to decay. He knew, specifically, what a reclamation demonstration holding was worth to the Bureau if it remained operational versus what it was worth stripped for parts. He would write that analysis before the assessor arrived. He would have it ready, documented, with the yield data and the methodology and the network structure laid out in the Bureau's own language, making the case that the holding's value was systemic, that taking it apart gave the empire less than leaving it intact and letting it demonstrate what Zone 9's eastern sector could produce. The empire had sent him here to disappear. He had not disappeared. Now the empire was going to have to decide what to do with someone who had taken dead land and lists of discarded women and turned them into a functioning food system during a period when the empire's own agricultural infrastructure was under pressure. He was no longer a failed exile. He was not yet a power. He was standing at the boundary between those two things. The first arc had been about surviving the death the empire had planned for him. The second arc would be about surviving the empire's attention when it realized he had. He picked up Cui Yan's count sheet and began writing.